Inside a county clerk's office on a gray Boston morning, Claire Ashford signed away the last thing she had left her name. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The witnesses smiled the way people smile at funerals, politely, distantly glad it wasn't them. Beside her stood a man in a faded flannel shirt and steel-toed boots worn down at the heel. Nathan Cole. He signed without hesitation, without a single tremor in those calloused, work-roughened hands. Then the phone started going off. The lawyers first, then the notaries, then every person in that room one by one, like dominoes falling in slow motion. Faces went pale. Someone stepped back. Claire didn't look at the screens. She looked at his hands. Still, perfectly still, resting at his sides, now unhurried, as though the room around him had nothing to do with him at all. The entire room knew something she didn't. And she was about to find out that the man she'd been handed as a burden was the one person in Boston who had been quietly holding the whole city together and had chosen a long time ago to let the world forget it. 3 weeks before she stood in that clerk's office, Claire Ashford had been sitting across from her father in a room that smelled like mahogany and old money and the particular kind of silence that precedes collapse. Richard Ashford had built his empire the way most men of his generation built things, through sheer, unrelenting force of will and a refusal to admit when something was cracking beneath the surface. For 35 years, Ashford Group had meant something in Boston. Its name was etched into the lobbies of glass towers in the financial district, pressed into the brass placards of luxury developments along the waterfront. Richard had built all of it, and now at 71, with his hands trembling slightly around a glass of water he hadn't touched, he was telling his daughter that it was gone. Not gone, almost gone. Which Claire had learned was the more dangerous kind. She sat with her back straight, and her face composed a habit from 4 years in Chicago, where she'd learned that showing nothing was sometimes the only leverage you had. She listened as her father laid it out. The South End development stalled after a catastrophic error in geological assessment. The Seaport project hemorrhaging money at twice the projected rate. 2 institutional investors had withdrawn from the Series B round within the same quarter. The bank was already tightening covenant terms. Richard set a single folder on the desk between them. "There's a way out," he said. Claire opened the folder. The terms were structured through a layered chain of subsidiaries, clean on the surface, deliberately obscured underneath. A creditor unnamed was offering full debt restructuring and a bridge capital injection. The number was enough to stabilize everything. The condition wasn't an interest rate. It wasn't equity. It wasn't anything Claire had a framework for. It was a marriage. The man's name was Nathan Cole. The file on him was thin to the point of insult: a freelance construction contractor based in Dorchester, a 9-year-old daughter named Maisie, no corporate affiliations listed. A photograph: a man in his late 30s standing outside what looked like a job site, not looking at the camera. Claire closed the folder. "Who put this together?" she said. It wasn't a question. Richard didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. The meeting the following morning included her stepmother Diane, her uncle Warren, and the kind of choreographed concern that Claire had grown up learning to read like a second language. Diane sat with her hands folded, her expression calibrated to something between sympathy and practicality. Warren stood near the window, with his arms crossed, the posture of a man who had already decided how this would end and was waiting for everyone else to catch up. Warren Ashford had spent most of his adult life one step behind his brother. Same bloodline, different outcomes. He had watched Richard build Ashford Group from a regional firm into something with real weight, and he had done it with the patience of a man who understood that the right moment, if you waited long enough, would eventually arrive. Claire had always known this about him. She had simply never had cause to say it out loud. He presented the terms with the practiced grief of someone delivering bad news they didn't actually find bad. His voice was measured. He spoke about responsibility, about legacy, about what it would mean for the 312 employees, whose names neither of them actually knew. Claire watched his eyes. They weren't grieving. They were calculating. She understood then, not everything, not yet, but enough. Warren needed the company saved because a collapsed Ashford group was worth nothing to him, but a destabilized one with Richard fading and Claire distracted and off balance navigating a marriage to a stranger while trying to hold the board together, that was a different kind of opportunity. He didn't need to take anything. He just needed to wait in the right position while everything shifted. What he said out loud was, "This is the only option left, Claire." What his eyes said was, "Say yes," and step sideways. She looked at the folder again. She thought about the Roxbury housing projects, 300 units of affordable development that Ashford Group was the primary funding mechanism for. She thought about her father's hands trembling around that glass of water. She thought about 35 years and what they amounted to, and whether any of it deserved to be preserved. Then she thought, if I don't do this, no one else will. She signed. Richard exhaled a long, slow release of something he'd been holding for months. Diane touched her arm briefly, the gesture of a woman who was relieved the difficult part was over. Warren said nothing, which was its own kind of confirmation. Claire capped the pen. She picked up her bag. She walked toward the door with the same straight back and composed face she'd walked in with. At the threshold, she turned. Warren was already looking at her. That careful, watchful attention he'd always had, the kind that processed rather than felt. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. There was a specific kind of message that didn't require words, and she wanted to make sure he received it clearly. She saw him. She had seen him from the beginning, and she was going to remember this room and his face in it for a very long time. She filed that look away, not as anger, as data. Then she left. The civil ceremony happened on a Tuesday. No family present except the legally required witnesses. The clerk's office on Cambridge Street was exactly what it was: fluorescent, functional, unremarkable. A place where paperwork happened, where lives were documented and filed and stamped. Nathan Cole arrived 4 minutes before the appointment time. He wore a faded flannel shirt and steel-toed boots that had clearly logged years of actual use. He didn't bring anyone. He stood at the registration desk with the particular stillness of someone who had learned not to perform composure, who simply had it. Claire had prepared herself to read him the way she read everyone, quickly, analytically, extracting what was useful and filing the rest. But there wasn't much to extract. He answered the clerk's questions directly. He didn't make small talk. When she arrived at his side, he looked at her. Once, not with curiosity, not with apology, and gave her a single nod. The kind you give a colleague before a meeting begins. She found that she preferred it to anything Warmer would have felt. He signed his name without hesitation. Nathan Cole in handwriting that was precise and unhurried. She signed her own name beneath it. The clerk stamped the certificate, and then the phone started. The lawyers first, a sharp buzz against the table. Then, the notaries. Then, the 2 witnesses who'd been scrolling idly, both of them suddenly rigid, staring at their screens. The color left their faces in the specific way that happens when information arrives that reorders something. Claire's own phone was in her bag. She didn't reach for it. She looked at Nathan instead. The line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the way he was watching the clerk organize the paperwork with the same unhurried attention he'd had since the moment he walked in. Whatever the room had just learned, he already knew it. And he had decided, long before this moment, that it did not require a reaction. The room knew something. He knew something. And for the first time since she'd signed her name to any of this, Claire Ashford felt the specific, unsettling sensation of being the least informed person in a situation she believed she had already assessed. She picked up her copy of the certificate. She didn't look at her phone until she was outside, standing alone on the sidewalk, with the cold Boston air moving through the street around her. By then, she already understood that whatever she thought this was, it wasn't that. The house on Delwood Street in Dorchester was not what Claire had brought herself to expect, which meant it was worse in the specific way that things are worse when you've already lowered your expectations, and reality still finds a way under them. It was a colonial-style wood frame built sometime in the 1950s, white paint gone slightly soft at the edges, a front porch with a wooden swing that looked like it had been repaired more than once by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The garage door was open. Inside, a table saw a rack of hand tools organized with a precision that didn't match the casualness of everything else. Nathan carried her bag to the door without asking whether she needed help, set it inside the entrance, and told her the spare room at the end of the hall had a working lock. That was the extent of the welcome. She had expected tension. She had prepared for hostility, or at minimum the particular discomfort of two strangers forced into proximity. What she got instead was something she had no framework for. Nathan simply moved through the house, the way water moves around an obstacle, not ignoring her, not accommodating her, just continuing. He left coffee on the counter in the morning before she was up. When the lock on her door jammed on the second day, she came home to find it fixed. No note, no mention of it at dinner. His silence was not cold. That was the part that unsettled her. Maisie was another matter entirely. The 9-year-old appeared at the kitchen table on Claire's first evening homework, spread in front of her, a pair of slightly too large glasses perched at the end of her nose. She looked up at Claire with the direct, unfiltered attention of a child who had not yet learned to perform indifference. "Did you know Saturn has 146 moons?" Maisie said. Claire set her bag down. "I didn't know that." "Most people don't." Maisie returned to her worksheet apparently satisfied. "Dad says most people stop being curious around age 12. I'm going to be an exception." Nathan, standing at the stove, said nothing, but something in the line of his shoulders shifted, not quite a smile, but the physical equivalent of one. Claire sat down at the far end of the table and opened her laptop. She told herself she was working. She was mostly watching. The professional detachment held for almost 2 weeks. It cracked the evening Nathan said 11 words that he clearly didn't intend to be significant. Claire had been reviewing a commercial acquisition in the financial district, a mid-rise office building, 14 floors, 2 potential buyers already circling. She'd left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while she poured coffee, and Nathan had glanced at the screen without stopping his movement across the kitchen. "That building has a structural irregularity on the 9th floor," he said. "From the original build, it's going to complicate any renovation above that level." Claire looked at him. "How do you know that Nathan set his mug down?" "I read a lot." He moved to the living room. The conversation, as far as he was concerned, was over. Claire stood in the kitchen with her coffee and looked at the screen. The structural report she'd been waiting on from the inspecting engineer, the one flagging an anomaly on the 9th floor, had arrived in her inbox 40 minutes ago. She had not yet opened it. She thought about Warren's face in that meeting room. She thought about the folder, the chain of subsidiaries, the unnamed creditor. She opened a new browser tab, not for the structural report, for something else. She told herself it was due diligence. She told herself she was simply being thorough. She was in truth beginning to pull on a thread. Victor Strang had been acquiring Boston real estate the way certain men acquired things, systematically without sentiment, and with the particular efficiency of someone who had decided the city was a resource rather than a place. He'd been moving through the outer edges of Ashford Group's portfolio for months, making offers on parcels adjacent to their development sites, lobbying through intermediaries on zoning questions. Claire had been watching him. She hadn't yet understood the geometry of what he was building. She understood it the morning 2 of Ashford Group's largest active projects lost their building permits simultaneously. The official reason was a technical compliance issue flagged by the city. The actual reason she learned through 2 phone calls and 1 very uncomfortable conversation with a city planning contact was that someone with significant political capital had pushed hard for the review. The timing wasn't coincidence. Strang's affiliated investment fund had made contact with at least one of Ashford's minority shareholders within the same week. Her father called that evening. She almost didn't recognize his voice, not because it had changed, but because the certainty had gone out of it. And Richard Ashford's certainty had always been such a structural component of how he sounded that without it, the voice itself seemed smaller. "This time it's actually finished, Claire," he said. She stayed on the phone for 11 minutes. She said the right things. When she hung up, she sat in the dark living room of the house on Delwood Street and didn't move. Nathan came home late with Maisie, who had fallen asleep in the truck and needed to be carried inside. Claire heard him moving quietly through the hallway, the soft sound of a door closing. Then he appeared in the entrance to the living room, still in his jacket. He took in the dark room, her posture, the untouched glass of water on the coffee table. He didn't ask. He went to the kitchen, and she heard the small domestic sounds of a saucepan, a cabinet, a spoon against ceramic. He set a mug of hot chocolate on the table in front of her. Then he sat down in the chair across the room, picked up a book from the side table, and opened it. He didn't say anything. He simply stayed. Claire wrapped both hands around the mug. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street. The house settled into its nighttime quiet. She didn't say anything either. After a while, she found that her breathing had slowed without her noticing. She was still on the couch when the clock read 2 in the morning. She heard it before she saw it, the low rumble of a truck engine turning over in the driveway. By the time she got to the window, Nathan's truck was already at the end of the block, turning left, disappearing into the dark. There was no reason for a construction contractor to leave the house at 2 in the morning, none that she could construct. She stood at the window for a long moment, the thread she'd started pulling 3 days ago, pulling back at her now, with considerably more force. She went back to the couch and did not sleep again until 4. The next morning, she opened her laptop to 2 things: a message from her father's attorney about the permit situation, and a financial news alert about a Delaware-registered LLC that had quietly acquired both parcels of land that Strang's fund had been targeting. The purchase price was 18% above market valuation. The transaction had been completed overnight. The entity's ownership structure was layered enough to take a forensic accountant a week to fully trace. Strang's play was blocked before it had fully materialized. Claire read the alert twice. Then she looked at the empty chair across the room, the one Nathan had been sitting in the night before, and she sat with a feeling she didn't immediately have a name for. It wasn't suspicion exactly. It was the sensation of a picture that had been slightly out of focus, suddenly beginning to sharpen one edge at a time. She was an analyst before she was anything else. She had spent 4 years in Chicago, learning to read data sets, acquisition patterns, corporate structures. She was good at it in the way that some people are good at languages, not just fluency, but an instinct for what the grammar underneath was actually saying. She opened a new tab and started working. It took her 4 days. Property records, building permits, cross-referenced against contractor licenses, corporate filings, going back 15 years. She built the picture the way she built all her analyses, without assumptions, following the data, wherever it actually led, rather than where she expected it to go. What the data showed her was Nathan James Cole, not the man on Delwood Street with the faded flannel shirt. The other one, the one who had founded Cole Development Group at 31 and spent the next 8 years acquiring, developing, and operating commercial real estate across Boston's core districts. The ownership portfolio, when she mapped it, fully covered roughly 1/3 of the city's prime commercial square footage. The estimated value of assets under control exceeded $4 billion. Then, 9 years ago, he had simply stopped. No announcement. No public exit. The company had been quietly dissolved through a series of transfers and restructurings. The few press references to the dissolution mentioned an internal dispute without naming the parties. There was one passing reference in a trade publication to a significant financial settlement paid by Cole himself to his own clients after a partner's fraud had compromised several contracts. He had made every affected party whole out of his own capital. The publication noted this as unusual. It had not pursued the story further. There was a brief mention in a profile that predated the dissolution of a daughter. No further details. Claire sat with the completed picture for a long time. Then she pulled up a separate document, the one she'd been quietly building since the morning after the signing, the one with Warren's name at the top, and she added 3 new lines. The Harborview Charity Gala was the kind of event where Boston's real estate and finance establishment gathered annually to feel good about themselves while actually networking. Claire attended because Ashford Group's institutional presence required it. She brought Nathan because the terms of their arrangement, while never formally articulated, included a public dimension that both of them had tacitly understood from the beginning. He wore a dark suit, no tie, no accessories. He stood with the ease of a man who had attended many rooms like this one and found them neither impressive nor threatening. Claire introduced him to 2 board-level contacts and watched them do the polite calculation: contractor husband, old money wife. The math not quite adding up, and file it away in the part of their minds reserved for things they considered beneath engagement. It was during the cocktail hour that a man named Patterson, who ran a mid-sized development firm on the North Shore and had been drinking since before the event began, made his way toward them, with the specific confidence of someone who had decided to say the thing other people were only thinking. "I keep trying to figure out," Patterson said, addressing a point somewhere between Nathan and Claire, "how a construction guy gets an invitation to a room like this." The room didn't go quiet, but the immediate vicinity did. Claire moved before she had consciously decided to. She stepped slightly forward, her hand resting on Nathan's arm, and she looked at Patterson with the expression she'd learned in 4 years of Chicago boardrooms, the one that communicated without heat that the conversation was over before it had begun. "He didn't need an invitation," she said. "He built half the room." Patterson laughed, uncertain whether she was joking. Then her expression confirmed that she was not, and he extracted himself with the practiced retreat of a man who had miscalculated the terrain. In the car on the way home, Nathan looked out the passenger window at the lights of the city moving past. After a while, he said quietly, "You didn't need to do that." Claire kept her eyes on the road. "I know." The Urban Development Summit at the Heinz Convention Center was 3 days later. Claire attended for Ashford Group. She found her seat in the 3rd row of the main hall and reviewed her notes while the room filled around her. The program listed the keynote speaker as the founding partner of Cole Urban Holdings. She had read the name. She had not connected it. When Nathan walked out from the wings, she understood why the phones had gone off in the county clerk's office. He wore a charcoal suit, no pocket square, no flourish of any kind. The room 300 developers, investors, city officials, and institutional capital representatives went quiet with the particular quality of quiet that happens when a space recognizes authority it wasn't prepared for. People who had been half attending straightened in their chairs. Someone near Claire closed their laptop. His eyes found her in the 3rd row. 1 second, direct, unreadable. Then he looked at the microphone. "Let's talk about this city," he said. She listened for 45 minutes to the most precise urban restructuring analysis she had ever heard delivered in a single sitting. The people around her were taking notes. A woman 2 seats down had filled both sides of a legal pad. Claire's own notebook stayed open and blank because she was not processing it as information. She was processing it as evidence. Afterward, they stood in the corridor outside the main hall. The crowd moved around them, 3 feet of distance between them, which felt in that moment much larger. Nathan spoke first. "How long have you known?" "A few days," Claire said. "I was going to tell you." He considered the phrasing of what came next. "When I was sure it was safe." "Safe for who?" "For Maisie." His voice was level, but there was something underneath it, not defensiveness, something older than that. "For the life we built here. The one where she gets to be a regular kid who likes astronomy and doesn't have to know what her father's name used to mean in this city." Claire looked at him. He looked back, Between them was 9 years of a decision she was only now beginning to understand the full weight of. The life he had constructed on Delwood Street, the faded flannel, the garage full of tools, the school pickup, and the homework at the kitchen table, none of it was performance. It was the actual thing. The thing he had chosen over $4 billion and everything that came with it. She didn't know what to do with that. She wasn't sure she had a category for it. What she knew was this: the careful, orderly assessment she'd built of Nathan Cole over the past weeks, useful in some places, wrong in others, needed to be rebuilt from the ground. And somewhere underneath the disorientation of that, there was something that felt less like threat and more like the specific vertigo of a door opening onto a much larger room than you'd expected to find. The story ran on a Tuesday morning. By noon, it had been picked up by 3 local outlets and 1 national real estate trade publication. The headline used the word fraud. The source was a former business partner of Nathan's, a man named Garrett Fowler, who had apparently been waiting 9 years for a platform, and found one the moment Nathan Cole's name resurfaced in connection with Cole Urban Holdings. The allegations were specific enough to sound credible, and vague enough to be immediately difficult to refute a series of construction contracts from the original Cole Development Group era, irregularities in billing clients, allegedly misled about subcontractor costs. Fowler was quoted extensively. Nathan wasn't quoted at all. Claire read the story twice, then set her phone face down on the kitchen counter. She already knew it wasn't true. Not because she trusted Nathan instinctively. She had not yet reached instinct, she was still operating on evidence. But because the evidence she had assembled over 4 days of forensic research 2 weeks earlier included the financial records of Cole Development Group's dissolution. Nathan had made every affected client whole out of his own capital before the company ceased to exist. There were no outstanding claims. There never had been. The story wasn't designed to win in court. It was designed to occupy the news cycle long enough for something else to happen. By Wednesday, she knew what that something else was. 3 of Ashford Group's active building permits had been flagged for administrative review by the city, a process that in practice meant construction halted until the review concluded, which could take anywhere from 3 weeks to 4 months, depending on how much pressure was applied from which direction. Simultaneously, she received a call from the company's outside counsel informing her that Douglas Mercer, who held 35% of the operating subsidiary through which Ashford Group ran its largest active developments, had been approached with an acquisition offer. The offer had come from a fund with no public profile. The fund, when she spent 2 hours tracing its structure, connected back to Strang. The geometry was clear now. The Fowler story was noise. The permits were a delay mechanism. Mercer was the actual target. If Strang acquired his stake, Ashford Group lost operational control of its most valuable assets, not ownership, but the ability to make decisions about them. It was a more elegant form of destruction than a hostile takeover. It looked from the outside like a simple investment. She was standing in the front hall of the house on Delwood Street, Cote, still on running the calculation in her head, when Nathan came in from the garage. He had already seen the story. She could tell by the quality of his stillness, not the natural, untroubled kind she'd come to recognize over the past weeks, but something that required more effort to maintain. They looked at each other across the hallway. Neither of them moved toward the other, or away. She understood what the moment cost him. If he responded publicly engaged with the story, revealed the full history of Cole Development Group, brought Cole Urban Holdings into open view, he would accomplish 2 things. He would clear his name, and he would end the life he had spent 9 years building. The school pickups, the garage on Delwood Street, the version of Maisie's childhood where her father was a contractor who came home smelling like sawdust, not a figure whose name made rooms go quiet. If he stayed silent, Strang's play ran its course, and Ashford Group went under. One of them would lose something. The question was, which loss was survivable? "I'm going to see Mercer," Claire said. Nathan's expression shifted. Not resistance, something more complicated. "Claire, I'm not asking you to do anything," she said. "I'm telling you what I'm doing." Douglas Mercer was 72 years old and had been in Boston commercial real estate long enough to remember when the seaport was still a working waterfront. He had a reputation for being methodical and for disliking people who wasted his time. Claire had met him twice at industry events and had not made a strong impression in either direction. She called his assistant on Thursday morning and asked for 30 minutes. She got 45. She did not bring a lawyer. She did not bring a counteroffer or a term sheet or anything that could be read as an opening negotiating position. She brought a folder of documents, and the truth, which she had found in her experience, was most persuasive when presented without ornamentation. She sat across from Mercer in his office on the 31st floor of a building in Post Office Square and told him everything. Strang's acquisition pattern over the past 3 years, the parcels, the zoning interventions, the methodology. What Strang had done to 2 other development portfolios in comparable situations with documentation. What would happen to the Roxbury housing developments if Ashford Group lost operational control, not in abstract terms, but specifically 308 units, the construction timeline, the community land trust agreements that would collapse without a functioning primary developer. Then she laid out what Cole Urban Holdings had built over 9 years of operating in the same market. No litigation, no regulatory actions, every single investor relationship intact, 31 completed projects. She put the numbers in front of him without commentary, because the numbers did not require it. Mercer read through the documents without speaking. He had the particular focus of a man who had been making consequential decisions for a long time, and understood that the feeling of urgency was usually a form of manipulation. When he finished, he looked up at her. "You know Strang's offer is considerably more than market rate." "I know," Claire said. "He's paying a premium for control, not for the asset. When he has what he wants from it, the premium disappears. And so does he." Mercer looked at the documents again. Then he reached across his desk for his phone and made a call to his attorney. The lockup agreement was signed the following morning. Strang's fund had no path forward. That same Friday, Nathan's legal team released the full documentation, 9 years of archived records, every contract from the Cole Development Group era, the complete financial record of the dissolution settlement, and a statement from each client who had been made whole. The response was overwhelming in its clarity. Garrett Fowler's attorney issued a statement by end of day that was, by any reasonable reading, a retraction carefully worded, stripped of any admission, but a retraction nonetheless. The story in the press collapsed within 48 hours. Fowler himself went quiet, his moment of leverage, spent leaving behind nothing but a public record that now ran in the opposite direction of everything he'd intended. Claire handled the board communications. She stabilized the permit situation the following week through a direct meeting with the city planning director, not through political leverage, which she didn't have, but through a presentation of the technical compliance documentation that should have prevented the review from being initiated in the first place. The review was closed by the end of that week. The last piece was Warren. She did not confront him in his office or in a boardroom or anywhere that gave him the architecture of professional authority. She went to her father's house on a Sunday afternoon when she knew Richard would be there, and she asked Warren to join them. He arrived with the wariness of a man who understood that an invitation delivered in that particular tone was not actually optional. She laid it out in Richard's study, the same room where weeks earlier her father had told her the company was finished. The timeline of Warren's awareness of Strang's intentions, reconstructed through a combination of email records, obtained through the company's legal counsel, and 3 conversations with people who had been in rooms with both men. The specific nature of his inaction, not a failure to see the threat, but a decision not to name it. A controlled crisis, managed from a careful distance, designed to leave him positioned as the stabilizing force once the damage reached a sufficient level. He had needed the company saved, but weakened. Claire distracted off balance, her authority diminished. Richard dependent. Warren ready. Richard listened to all of it without interrupting. He sat in the chair behind his desk, with his hands folded, and he looked, for the first time in Claire's memory, genuinely old, not in the physical sense, but in the way a person looks when something they've relied on has been taken from them, and they're accounting for its absence. When she finished, Richard looked at his brother. Warren started to speak. Richard raised one hand, a small gesture, and Warren stopped. What passed between them was not something Claire could fully read. Decades of shared history, a specific kind of disappointment that has no clean name because it involves love and betrayal in proportions too tangled to separate cleanly. Richard looked away first. He picked up his phone and called the board's outside counsel. Warren was removed from the board by unanimous vote the following Tuesday. He didn't contest it. The relationship between the two brothers, whatever it had been, and whatever it might become, was not something that would resolve on any timeline Claire could see from where she stood. Some damage is structural. You learn to build around it. The kitchen on Delwood Street was quiet by 10 o'clock that night. Maisie had gone to sleep 2 hours earlier, exhausted from a full day at school, followed by her astronomy club's monthly meeting. The house had settled into its familiar nighttime register, the creak of old wood, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of the street outside going gradually still. Nathan made coffee. Claire sat at the kitchen table and watched him do it, the precise, unhurried movements she had observed for weeks now, without fully understanding what she was looking at. He set a mug in front of her and sat down across the table with his own. For a while, neither of them spoke. The coffee cooled slowly between them. Then Nathan said, his name was Garrett Fowler. He said it without preamble, as though beginning in the middle of a conversation they'd both been having internally for some time. He was my co-founder. We'd known each other since college. I trusted him the way you trust someone when you've built something together from nothing, which is to say completely and without examining the foundation as carefully as you should. He looked at his mug. He'd been redirecting subcontractor payments for almost 2 years before I found out. By the time the full scope of it was clear, 4 clients had been materially affected. The contracts were compromised. The reputational exposure was, it would have been significant. Claire listened. She didn't ask questions. She had learned over the past weeks that Nathan spoke in complete thoughts, and that interrupting them produced less information, not more. The legal options were all public, he said. Litigation, regulatory filings, the whole process, which I understood at that point, was a process that would take years and would be in the news for most of them. And Maisie was 4 weeks old. He looked up. Her mother had left when she was 10 days old. It wasn't a crisis that built slowly. She was simply gone one morning. So I had a 4-week-old a company in the middle of a legal catastrophe and 2 options: fight it in public and spend the next 3 years as a story, or settle it privately and make every affected client whole out of my own capital. He drank his coffee. I chose the second one. I paid everyone. I dissolved the company. I moved to Dorchester, which is where I grew up and where I still knew people, and where no one was going to look for me. And I started taking construction contracts because I actually like the work, and because Maisie needed a father who came home at a predictable time. Claire's hands were around her mug. Your uncle came to you with this arrangement, Warren, Nathan said. Yes. He showed me the employee file's first 312 names. Then he explained what he was going to ask you to do. He met her eyes steadily. I told him, I would only agree if you made the decision yourself. Claire looked at him. I didn't make the decision myself. I know. His voice was even. That's why I tried to make the house livable. It was such a plain thing to say. No performance in it. No calculation. Just the honest account of what he had done and why. Claire sat with it for a moment, the specific, unfamiliar quality of being told the truth by someone who hadn't needed to tell it, who gained nothing from the telling except the absence of a lie between them. She thought about the first morning in that house, when she had walked into the kitchen to find the coffee already made. the lock on her door fixed without comment, the night of the hot chocolate when he had simply stayed. Small things, each of them. She had cataloged them without knowing what she was cataloging. "I was wrong about you," she said, finally. "From the beginning. Not because I didn't have enough information. I'm good at working with incomplete information. I was wrong because I decided what I was looking at before I actually looked." Nathan didn't say anything immediately. He turned his mug slowly on the table. "You were looking at a situation you didn't choose," he said. "That's a reasonable place to start from. It's not an excuse." "No," he agreed. "But it's a reason." They stayed at the table until the coffee was gone, and the street outside had gone completely quiet. There was nothing resolved between them in any formal sense, no declaration, no named thing. But the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of two people sharing a space. It was something that required both of them to make. 3 months later, the house on Delwood Street looked the way it always had. The white paint slightly soft at the edges, the wooden swing on the porch, the garage door open on a Saturday afternoon, with the sound of something being built inside. Claire had converted the back bedroom into an office, a different room from the spare one she'd used at the beginning one, with a window that faced the yard. Nathan had built her a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf along the east wall, measured twice, anchored properly. Built to last without making any announcement of permanence. She hadn't commented on it. He hadn't explained it. Some agreements are reached without language. Ashford Group had stabilized under a restructured board. Richard had retired formally in the fall, his name remaining on the masthead, in the way that founders' names remain present, honored no longer operational. Warren's absence was its own kind of ongoing fact, something the family navigated around, without yet knowing what shape the navigation would eventually take. On a Thursday afternoon in June, Maisie came home from school with her astronomy club backpack and the specific energy of a child who had received good news and couldn't contain it without some effort. She dropped her bag on the porch swing and found Claire in the garden, where Claire had recently and somewhat ambitiously begun attempting to grow tomatoes. "The school got a new telescope," Maisie said, sitting on the porch steps. "A real one, not the plastic kind. We're doing a Saturn observation in October." "That's good," Claire said. "You'll be able to count the moons yourself." 146. Maisie said it automatically, then looked at her with the direct, unornamented attention she'd had since the very first evening. "Are you staying?" Claire looked at her. The question was simple, and not simple at all, the kind that 9-year-olds ask because they haven't learned yet to approach the things they actually need to know sideways. "Yes," Claire said. "I'm staying." Maisie nodded with the particular satisfaction of someone confirming something they had already concluded from available evidence. She picked up her backpack and went inside to find her father. Nathan appeared in the garage doorway a few minutes later, sawdust on his forearms, the unhurried expression that was simply his face in its natural state. He looked at Claire in the garden, and something moved across his features, not quite a smile, and not one. The specific expression of a man watching something he had not let himself expect arrive anyway. She looked back at him. The city rose in the distance beyond the rooftops of Dorchester, the skyline Nathan had once owned, and walked away from the buildings that bore the quiet, unmarked evidence of decisions he had made and things he had built when the city was still something he was trying to conquer. He had put all of it down, not because he had failed, but because he had understood, at a specific and irreversible moment, that it was not the thing worth keeping. Claire had spent 30 years in buildings that carried her family's name, learning to read rooms and balance sheets and the faces of people who wanted something from her. She had been good at it. She was still good at it. But she was beginning to understand, standing in this ordinary garden, on this ordinary street, that she had spent most of that time looking at the right things from the wrong distance. Some distances once closed are not something you remeasure. You simply stop.